do Parsha.
Yes.
Okay, Parshas Tzav. Okay. So, we went through the various description of all the korbanos in the previous parsha. We explained what an ola is and what a chatos is and what a shlomim is and what the korban minchas are. And now we get into a little bit of some greater fine-tuned detail. And the first thing that we have at the beginning of Parshas Tzav is that we pick up first thing in the morning in the Beis HaMikdash every day, and it was in the Mishkan also, but in the Beis HaMikdash too. The fire from all the korbanos, they would put all the pieces of all the animals and everything that had to be burned on the Mizbeach in the fire, and it would burn all night long. And we're told that then they get up in the morning, and now you've got this huge pile of ash on the Mizbeach, and you have to reset the fire and get things all cleaned up. The first service in the morning was called the Trumas Hadeshin. The Trumas Hadeshin was the service in which they would go to the top of the Mizbeach, scoop up some of the ashes to remove some of the ashes from this big, this mound that was forming of ashes in the middle of the Mizbeach, and they would take it down, and then they would remove those ashes to a designated place outside of the camp, and outside of Yerushalayim during the times of Beis HaMikdash, outside the camp during the times they were in the Midbar. It's actually a very interesting mitzvah. It's the first service of the day, and the service itself, the Kohen changes garments in order to do it. And Rashi explains the reason why the Kohen changes garments in order to do it is because it's messy, right? It's ashes. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to get your regular clothes dirty to do that service. So it's sort of, you'd think like there's a lowliness to this service because it's messy and a little bit dirty going up on the ashes and getting the ashes down and things. Nevertheless, the Mishnah in Yuma tells us that because it was first, the Kohanim used to get very, very excited about it. And so, especially, I guess, the younger Kohanim would get up early in the morning in order to be first. And at first, how do you decide who is the one who gets to do it? So the first way that it used to be was whoever was there would get to do it first. So maybe, I guess, when Aaron and his sons were there, they maybe had a rotation or some kind of friendly way. But then once the number of Kohanim increased, so then they actually started a foot race. And it was whoever would run up to get to the top of the Mizbeach fastest would get to do it. And that worked until the Mishnah tells us until one Kohen got pushed off the side of the ramp and got injured. And as a result, they stopped that from happening. So they changed it and they created a lottery, right? And they would pick a number, and all the Kohanim would stand around in a circle and hold out either one or two fingers, and then they would count all the fingers, and whoever it came out on would be the one who got the responsibility, the way to do it. It's actually kind of interesting because I was in Rabbi Nussbaum's class. He was something he was very proud because he would do Maseches Yuma, and so whenever they had to choose a student to be able to do some kind of task in the classroom, he would yell pious, and everybody would come around and throw one finger or two fingers into the circle in order to do it that way. So it's kind of a fun way that they were doing those things. The Mizbeach's fire had to burn continuously. Right? We have the we have the Ner Tamid in our shuls, which commemorates that. Right, and it's an electric light in our shuls that is in front of the Aron that comes down the front and has all kinds of like sculptures to it. It's really nice, but it is a remembrance of this, and it's both a positive commandment and a negative commandment in that it's supposed to burn always and never be extinguished. The portions of the korbanos that we are reading in some of these parshas get excerpted and they get then placed into the siddur. So I had to point out when they are. This Trumas Hadeshin piece is included in the korbanos section of the siddur. I didn't bring my siddur with me, but if you take a look at the you can take a look and show, right? Right. So that's good. Good. So. It's also good if you take a look at the Korbanos page, and every page is worn except the Korbanos page. That's the part that you don't say, but good. Okay, so this is the Kiyor, and this is the Tiru. Here we are. Zos Torah Sa'olah. This part right over here, right at the beginning, is the part of the Trumas Hadeshin piece, which comes from this week's Parsha, and tells them to change their garments in order to be able to do it. And it's interesting because the Torah has an interesting phrase, and so I want to be able to read. It says, "Vayidaber Shem Moshe Omer, Tzav es Aaron v'Espanav limor." Right, that's from the beginning of this parsha. Zos Torah Sa'ula hi ha'ula. This is the Torah of the Ola. It is the Ola. That sounds like it is the Ola. That's why you call it the Ola. So it is this. Gemara tells us about this conversation that we discussed a little bit last week between Avraham and Hashem, where he says, okay, so what happens if my children do the wrong thing? And Hashem says, well, there'll be korbanos, ways for them to get an atonement. And Avraham says, that's great, but what if there's no Beis Hamikdash? And then they need an atonement. So he says that Zos Torah Sa'olah, that when you read the portion of the Olah, Hi Ha'olah, that is the same thing as actually bringing in Olah. So therefore, when we read these portions, we read these korbanos, it's as though you're actually doing it themselves. The Torah then goes through turns back to the topic of the mincha offerings and brings us to a type of mincha that we did not discuss last week, and that is the korban toda, which is a combination mincha and shlamim. Right? It has an animal portion to it, and it also has loaves that are brought, and it has a lot of loaves, 10 loaves of various types of matzos. It even has chametz loaves that are included as well. The toda is brought for the same reasons why we do the what do you call it, bracha? For getting out of jail, for being sick, for getting better when you're sick, for crossing the sea. That's the what's it called? Birchas HaGomel. Birchas HaGomel, right?
I kept saying golem.
I know you're sitting there.
It can't be the golem.
I don't know why. It's the morning without not enough coffee yet. So Birchas HaGomel, and so the obligation when in the times of the Beis Hamikdash was a korban. They didn't say Birchas HaGomel. They brought this korban toda, and it was kind of nice. We had this huge amount of bread and the sacrifice and the meat that goes with it. And you donate one of the loaves of bread to the Kohanim that are there on the service, but you take home most of the animal, you take home most of the bread and things, and the purpose of it was that you'd invite all of your friends over and have a meal. And that is the Sudas Hodah, that is the meal of Thanksgiving. And there are people still nowadays that if they had a miracle or some kind of an event that happened to them, they sponsor a kiddush, or they will have a meal and invite people over. I remember there was a person in Norfolk, Virginia, that almost got into a car accident once. That a tree fell in front of him on the highway, and he was miraculously got around it. And every year, I know the story because every year he would sponsor the Shalosh Shudas and get up and tell the story about how Hashem saved him while he was driving the car, and we all heard the story again and again. But that is the idea, right? And this is Mizmor L'Soda. That is the commemoration that's in our Siddur also. It's not actually in Korbanos, but it's in Davening where we see Mizmor L'Soda. This is the Korban Toda, right? That we are bringing. Since it's interesting to note, I focus a little bit on the Korban Toda, is that since 10 of the loaves that are in this offering are chametz, this Korban Toda cannot be brought on Pesach, right? So therefore, in Davening, Mizmor L'Soda is not said during Chol Hamoed Pesach. It's not even said on Erev Pesach. And the reason why it's not said on Erev Pesach is that for the Korban Toda, you have all day and the following night to eat it. If night is Pesach, then you wouldn't have enough time to be able to eat it. So therefore, we don't bring a korban if the amount of time that you have to eat the korban is going to be limited, restricted. Even if you say, okay, I'll invite more people, we'll just finish it this afternoon. Can't do that. You can't bring a korban if the time is restricted, if the amount of time is restricted. So therefore, Mizmor L'Soda, which is for this Korban Toda offering, is not said Erev Pesach. It's not said all during Pesach as well. Then, in Levi, we find out about the Korbans, the Kohen Gadol's daily mincha offering, called the Minchas Chavitin, which comes from the pan that it was made in. The Korban, for most of the Korban minchas that we've discussed, there's a scoopful that was taken out, we said put into the other utensil, and then that other utensil, the scoop was burned, but the other utensil was made into loaves of bread, and it was shared amongst the Kohanim that were in the service of the Beis Hamikdash that week. The korban, the Kohen Gadol's korban was completely burnt. So there's a mincha offering that was completely burnt, the minchas chavitin, and it's described that they would bring half of it, they would take the whole offering, they would bring half of it in the morning, half of it in the afternoon, and that was a special mitzvah for the Kohen Gadol, and the Torah tells us that when the Kohen Gadol dies, the next Kohen fills in and continues on and does this korban chavitin. It becomes the Kohen Gadol's special offering that he brings on a daily basis. So that we have this mitzvah number 136, that he has to bring half of this korban in the morning, half in the afternoon, and then that it's fully burned and not eaten is 137. Okay, then we're brought into the details of the korban chatas a little bit. when it's described, we asked in the Wednesday class where the Korban Chatos was brought, and I hadn't mentioned it in the class, but the reason why is because in this week's parsha it tells us the Korban Chatos is brought in the same place that the Korban Olah is brought. And in last week's parsha, we were told the Korban Olah is brought in the north side of the Mizbeach. Right, the north side of the Mizbeach, if you would walk in, on the east side, the Mizbeach would be on the west side. So therefore the Mizbeach the ramp would be facing off to the left, the front of the Mizbeach off to the right side of the Mizbeach, not between the Mizbeach and the Beis HaMikdash, but off to the side of it is the north side. That was where the Korbanos had to be slaughtered. And it's interesting that the Torah says that the Korban Chatos doesn't say the Korban Chatos is supposed to be slaughtered in the north side. It says it's slaughtered on the same place as the Korban Olah. And that's how we know that it's slaughtered on the north side. And Mefarshim explained that the Torah is teaching us a very important lesson of sensitivity. Because everybody knows you're bringing Korban Chatos, it's because you did something wrong. So if the Korban Chatos' procedure looked significantly different than a Korban Olah's procedure, which is not because you did something bad, just because you wanted to offer it to the Beis HaMikdash. So then people would know that these are the sinners. Here's line up here if you're all the bad people and all the good people on this side, right? So the Torah puts all the people who are bringing their Korban Chatos and the people who are bringing their Korban Olah together in the same place. People who were there couldn't tell whether you were there for a Korban Olah, for a Korban Chatos, other than the Kohen who was bringing it, who would know that he had to obviously bring the different pieces, the different portions in a different way. The Kohen gets to eat some of the Korban Chatos. The Kohen who's actually bringing it is able to consume part of the meat of the Korban Chatos. The Korban Olah, the Kohen who was servicing the Korban Olah could only keep the skin. But nevertheless, other than that, it was indistinguishable for the people that were watching. You couldn't tell by watching, all the Kohanim working who was the person who was the Avera person and who was the person who was just being extra nice and donating a Korban Olah, which is kind of a nice thing. If a Korban Chatos was of the sort that the blood was not sprinkled on the outer Mizbeach, but had to be sprinkled on the inner Mizbeach. We had an example of that last week where we had a bull for Kohen Gadol who did the wrong thing. Kohen Gadol's bull that he did the wrong thing, the blood would actually be put on the Mizbeach on the inside, not on the outside. Also, we find that such a thing by Yom Kippur also, the blood of the animals was sprinkled on the inside. Whenever the blood is brought on the inside, then the meat is not eaten. So you don't eat those sacrifices. The offering is taken to the outside of the camp and burned in those circumstances.
Is that just like a simon, sort of?
It's like those two things connect in some way, yeah. If the animal is holy, if the blood of the service is holy enough that it gets brought inside into the Beis HaMikdash, then the animal is not eaten. Right, so there's a correlation between those two things, and so that is mitzvah number 139. That if you have a chatos offering where the blood goes inside, then you don't eat the Kohen does not eat that one. Okay, so now into Shlishi. Okay, the Shlishi were brought back to the details of the Korban Shlomim, right, and that is the Korban Toda that we discussed. Right, with all the different loaves and things is brought here as a subcategory of a Korban Shlomim, right, and therefore we have the mitzvah of eating it by midnight, no leftovers. Anytime the Gemara in Masechtas Brachos tells us that anytime we have a mitzvah to eat something by midnight, really we have all the way until the next morning, and that applies to us with our Korban Pesach that we have to worry about in eating our afikomen by midnight. Therefore, if we wound up for some reason delaying our afikomen and we didn't get to eat it by midnight, we don't have a prohibition to not eat our afikomen at that point. You still eat your afikomen if it's a little bit beyond, but nevertheless, we try to be able to eat it by midnight, and the rationale is that if we let everybody wait till the last minute, then somebody's going to make a mistake, and then it'll be too late. And if you do leave anything over to the morning, so then the leftovers have to be burned. So you can't eat it after that. So therefore, the Rabbanan said, anything that you have till morning to eat, you may as well finish it by midnight, right? And then that's the way that we operate. We are told about the mitzvah, the avera really of pigul. Pigul is when a Kohen sacrifices a offering, he has to have all the right intentions in mind. Right? He has to know what korban this is. He has to know where it's supposed to be eaten. He has to know when it's supposed to be eaten. And if the Kohen has the wrong intentions in mind when he sacrifices it, he can ruin a sacrifice. Question is whether he's financially liable. Let's say if I have a Kohen that is just a not nice guy and he or let's say, he's in a fight with this guy, and this guy comes and brings his korban, and he slaughters the korban, and he goes, great, I just want to let you know, I had the wrong intention when I did your sacrifice, have a nice day, right? So we have a couple of factors and reasons why the Kohen doesn't have to financially pay for those sorts of circumstances. First of all, generally speaking, there's an indemnity for a Kohen. I guess if he messes up a shechita on a sacrifice and things, I don't believe he's financially responsible in any event if he's doing his best, right? We don't hold him, otherwise it's a large amount of accountability for the Kohanim who are doing services. But also we have a principle that if the only damage that a person does to an object is spiritual, then you're not liable in Beis Din in court to repay it. Let's take, for example, since we're around Pesach, let's say somebody steals somebody's chametz before Pesach, and then after Pesach says, I want to do tshuva, and you come over after Pesach and say, actually, I stole your chametz. Here's your chametz back, right? So this would be under the category of chametz she'avar alav Pesach, the chametz that existed in a Jew's possession during Pesach, and the Rabbanan said you have to burn it, you have to destroy it, right? You can't get benefit from it because the Chacham didn't want anybody to hide their chametz till after Pesach, hoping to get some benefit out of it at the end. Hi. So therefore, the chametz needs to be destroyed, and therefore there's sort of like there's a spiritual deficiency to this chametz that leads it to not be able to be used. So the person who lost his chametz is the robber is actually considered to have returned that which he stole, and he is not liable in court for anything more. Now, from Hashem's perspective, Hashem could hold you responsible. So if you really want to get a full tshuva and things, you probably have to take care of it in any event. But Beis Din's not going to go after this coin and say that you messed it up on purpose.
But what happens if this person doesn't have enough money? Like, he's been saving up to do this korban, and he doesn't have enough money to go to make a second korban or bring something else. So what does he do?
He's going to have to ask people for help. Right? Yeah, that's correct. The GoFundMe. This is going to be a story in Mishpacha magazine about the Kohen.
My Kohen had no kavanah.
The Kohen with wrong kavanah. It'll be a scandal.
That's so hard for them. That's so sad because you're putting it in the hands of somebody else, hoping that they're.
And you've
we do this all the time.
Unfortunately, you have a history
that's like,
in the Beis HaMikdash times of corrupt Kohanim, and it starts with the children of Eli, right, who were in the Beis HaMikdash during the first Beis HaMikdash time, who were forcing people to bring certain types of korbanos and things so that they could benefit from the meats that they, in inappropriate ways, and taking portions that were not designated for them. And it goes all the way into the second Beis HaMikdash, where many of the Kohanim families had a allegiance to the Tzedukim, right, who were the non, the non loyal to the Rabbanim sects of the Jewish people, and so there was a lot of corruption amongst the Kohanim. So it was definitely a concern and an issue. Of course, culminating in the big story in the second Beis HaMikdash time, where one of the Kohanim Gedolim did not do part of the service on Sukkot properly, and everybody noted it and threw their esrogim at him and pelted him with their esrogim. So you have all kinds of conflict between the Kohanim and the people. So, but that not now. Now everybody's good. Everybody was good then, and everybody's good now. So yeah, okay. So that's the pigul, right? If anything becomes tamei, right? If a korban becomes tamei, it also has to get burned. Those are the mitzvahs there, right? That there's a prohibition to eat the chelav, which is the forbidden fats of certain types of animals, which you can't eat of domesticated animals. You can eat those when you sacrifice for personal use for, let's say, a wild animal like a deer. Those fats are permissible in those animals. Just domesticated animals becomes prohibited. And also, when you're using it for yourself, you can get benefit from those fats of kosher animals. You can use them for soap or for some other purposes. You just cannot eat them; they become non-kosher for eating. But on the mizbeach, you cannot burn them, and you also cannot consume the blood of birds or mammals.
New family interview number 30.
Okay, good. I will be there. We will get through the last section. Baruch Hashem, we're very busy these days. So, the fourth aliyah, we rewind back in time. Rashi points out that the Torah does not go in order. The Torah is rewinding back in time again, back to the Yemei Miluim again. We're back to the 23rd of Adar. all over again, and we zoom in this time on the actual sacrifice. Now that the Torah has told us about sacrifices and has told us about how the service is performed, now we go back, not just talking about the garments the Kohanim wore or the way they built the Mishkan, but the actual services, the actual korbanos that they did during the Yemei HaMiluim. So in Revi, right, we begin the Kohanim. We review back to the 23rd, and Aaron is getting dressed and his sons, and Aaron gets invested as the Kohen, as the Kohen Gadol. Into Chamishi, then we're told that he's supposed to bring a korban chatos, a bull offering, as a sin offering. The question that the Gemara wants to know is, what is the nature of this sin offering? Whose sins are we forgiving? Is this a community offering, or is this an individual offering? And it seems that the Gemara proves, based on the fact that part of the service is that the Kohanim have to lean their hands upon the animal to confess their sins, that it seems that this was a cleansing of Aaron as he's entering the service. But it sort of has both characteristics to it, because the community paid for the offering. So the community bought the offering, donated it, gave it to Aaron, who then brought it as a personal offering. And then the blood of that first bull was brought on the corners of the Mizbeach, as we had described. And then we're told the next thing that they brought was a ram as an olah. And of course, at this point, we already know what korban olah is, because we've learned about it, because the Torah went in that order. We're going to rewind back and say, here's a chatas, here's an olah. Now, let's talk about exactly how it was done. They did a chatas for a bull offering, and then they went and did the olah. Then they had a second ram in Shishi, where they did a shlamim for the El HaMiluim. Right? This one, the blood was placed on the ears, thumbs, and toes of Aaron and his sons, which is similar to procedures that are done by somebody who has tsaras. And when we get to tsaras later on, the only thing that we're going to see is that the blood offering and the placing of the blood on the person, the order is reversed. And this is sort of the higher, loftier spiritual level, that the blood was brought first, and then the remaining blood was placed on Aaron and his children, rather than the reversed order when it comes to the person who has tsaras. There were korbanos that are then brought to Aaron. He took some loaves of the bread from the korban toda. He brought the animal, the meat from the shlamim, and they waved it, which means they moved it up and down, right, left, and in order to be able to indicate that they're elevating this offering to Hashem. That is done on several types of korbanos. That's a general procedure of korban toda. And then Shvi, we have the final steps of the inauguration. At that point, Moshe sprinkles holy oil and the blood. The Kohanim are instructed they have to stay inside the Mishkan for 7 days, which creates a huge issue, because we know that the Mishkan was taken down and put back up every single day of the 7 days when we learned before. So where were they if they were supposed to be in the Mishkan 7 days? So you have all kinds of commentaries that try to figure out exactly what it means. One commentary says it was left up all night, and every morning they took it down and then put it right back up immediately. So Aaron was there all night. The other explanation is, no, it doesn't mean that Aaron and his sons had to stay there all night. It just means that whenever they had to be in the Beis HaMikdash, when they were called, they had to be there, whether it was day or night. So they had to be on call day or night. Another explanation is, even though they took down the Mishkan, they left the outer courtyard curtains up so that there was an internal section that Aaron and his children were in. But that is the Mefarshim trying to be able to realize that this Torah portion and the Torah portions that we read in Vayakov Likudei have to align with each other, because it's the same series of events happening. We're just zooming back in on a closer look at a different aspect of what was going on. And then they're supposed to eat the parts of the offerings, and then they burn all of the leftovers. And then the summary of all of the mitzvahs in Parshas Tzav is on that secondary page. That's Parshas Tzav.
Cool. Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Because I know you have to go to the interview. If they were in there for 7 days, what were they doing over Shabbos? Because they couldn't do anything on Shabbos.
They could do
That's
so.
all malacha, right? So
Yes.
What were they doing there for those 25 hours?
Yeah, so they did everything the same way. They did all the korbanos, and we know that we learned that the korbanos push off Shabbos. Mm-hmm. So all of the service of the base, the community service, communal offering service of all year long, right? During the Beis HaMikdash, they still brought the korban tamid every day on Shabbos. Okay. They still burned everything. They still lit the menorah on Shabbos. All of those things were still done on Shabbos.
Okay.
Shocking. I love the look of shock. Yes, that is correct.